Welcome to Compeer's Ag Edge, brought to you by Compeer Financial. In each episode, we break down complex agricultural economics, policy dynamics, and farm business topics into conversations that make sense for your operation. We're here to help you stay informed and confident about the trends and decisions affecting your agricultural business. So I think that the biggest news of ag policy is where we should start for the day. I'm Megan Roberts, Ag Economist at Compeer Financial, and I'm joined by Ben Duncanson with Legislative Affairs here at Compeer Financial. Ben, take it away. What happened last week?
Well, happy to report that the House was able to actually pass the Farm Bill out of its chamber, something that we've been waiting for and marks a high water point in this Farm Bill cycle. This is the furthest that the Farm Bill has gotten since the last time it passed in 2018. So we're delighted to see that come out of the House, and many of the things that the farm credit system had advocated for many years were included. Before we get in too far the details, we're going to talk a little bit about the sausage-making process when it comes to all things Farm Bill, because it might be informative as we think what comes next for the bill as it heads over to the Senate for them to draft their version of the bill for consideration as well. So we'll just talk a little sausage making, a little bit about what's in it, and go from there. So it was actually for all you DC policy nerds out there, it was actually a pretty interesting process. These days, the good old schoolhouse rock of how a bill becomes a law is a little bit different. What actually happened was the House was once again convening. It was the week before the current May recess that they're on, and they had some big ticket items that they needed to get done. FISA, which is Foreign Intelligence and Surveillance Authorization, would have ended that week, plus funding for DHS and getting the reconciliation bill process going on all things Department of Homeland Security to get that reauthorization up. As folks remember, up until last week, DHS was still technically shut down, although an executive order did allow folks like TSA to continue to get paid. So they had some hot ticket items. So in a big week full of challenging political issues, why not add a farm bill to that process? So that was one of the 5 bills that were under considerations by the Rules Committee last Monday. And it was decision of the leadership to package all of those bills together to try to get through the House under one rule. What ended up happening was that after 2 days within the Rules Committee, once amendments were considered, a total of 58 amendments at that time were filed for the Farm Bill and found in order. The rule went to the House floor. The normal process is the party in power, all the members of that party usually vote for the rule, and the opposition party usually vote against the rule. And that logic stayed consistent. However, there was some issues that prevented some members of the House Republican Conference from being able to vote for that rule. The biggest one was a couple provisions in the Farm Bill. So in order to save the rule for everything, they ended up having to strip the Farm Bill out of the consideration for that week. And for a lot of us that have been waiting for this day for quite a long time, we are a little concerned that if this got punted, when would we see it again? But thanks to some Midwestern state Republicans, they were able to once again tee up another rule for the Farm Bill to allow that to go through and get consideration. So a couple things that were going to be included in the Farm Bill did not end up being included. Foremost among them was a pesticide labeling provision that was a little bit controversial, not only within the Republican caucus, but within the Democratic caucus as well. That was a big thing for us in industry that use glyphosate and other chemical products out there as well. However, given some of the controversy amongst the MAHA folks, and some other political contingencies out there, the Farm Bill was not able to proceed with that in it, and the House allowed an amendment to strip that out. So once that was clear and was no longer under consideration, after a late night of opening statements, the next morning they ended up voting on that Farm Bill at 10 a.m. and were able to get it across the finish line. And the bill did pass with bipartisan support. It passed 224 to 200, with 14 Democrats voting in favor, as well as a majority of the Republicans -3. So it was a pretty good week for agriculture and all things farm credit. As I mentioned earlier, Farm Credit had been advocating for several changes that we're delighted to see included as part of the bill, especially for us folks at Compeer. One of the big ticket items was the Investing in Rural America Act. This would allow farm credit institutions and Compeer to partner with USDA and commercial lenders to make sure that communities have essential community facilities, things like hospital, childcare facilities, senior care facilities, given that there has always been challenges in rural America making sure that there's enough capital available for those projects to be either enacted or modernized. We are very happy to see that included. Some other pieces of stuff that we had worked on in cooperation with, again, other commercial lenders, USDA, and our friends on Capitol Hill were some reforms to the FSA loan programs, not only raising the limits for the direct and guarantee programs, fixing the down payment loan limit that had been stuck at where it was since the 2018 Farm Bill and Points Beyond due to a technical error. There was a couple other things in there that allowed us to work more closely with FSA and hopefully allow that process to be a little bit easier out there for beginning farmers. And then another big win for us was some change in the way in which FSA is able to work with family farms in transition to the next generation and allow greater flexibility for farmers to access that program no matter how they structure themselves, especially during, again, that transition process. So that was one of the many things that was included in Title V of the Farm Bill. That's the credit title for all those folks out there. And a lot of big wins for agriculture in that bill. And we are very happy to see it make another step forward. As a lot of folks know out there, uncertainty as you try to run your business is never a good thing. So we're happy that Congress was able to provide a little bit more certainty out there to farmers, especially as we head into spring and another year of tighter margins out there as well. So, Megan, any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to talk about the Senate next and the next stops with this process.
Well, I was going to ask you about the Senate next. So, of course, we've got this bipartisan passed House version of the Farm, Food, and National Security Act of 2026, or Farm Bill 2.0, Farm Bill Skinny, however you want to name it. Of course, that's not where this ends. We are just through this first major step. Talk to me about moving into the Senate this May.
That's a good point. This is the first step in a longer process. We can celebrate a little bit. It's a long time coming, but the Senate is up next. And there will be some different political considerations when the bill heads over the Senate. Senate Democrats are really hoping to include especially some provisions to soften the blow of some of the SNAP cuts for states, individual states. As folks know, a lot of the funding for SNAP was shifted from the federal government onto the states, given a variety of technical things, including the state's error rate for SNAP payments, would determine the new cost for that program. That's something that Democrats have been advocating for inclusion as part of this farm bill, is some sort of correction or delay in that process. So that will be another item. Not that that wasn't a big item in the House, but given the dynamics of the Senate, that will be another thing under discussion as well. Some other things as well. Prop 12, which we're happy to see included in the House bill, will face a slightly different politics in the Senate. So that's something for us in the hog industry to keep an eye on. There's also some provisions around hemp that were included in the One Big Beautiful Bill that will limit that industry. That would be something that would be under consideration in the Senate as well, which would be a little bit of an interesting political issue. If you look at the great state of Kentucky, you actually have one senator on side for keeping the language that was in the One Big Beautiful Bill, those restrictions in, and you have another senator that would very much like to see those removed again. And you can guess which one is which on that one, folks. I won't lead you to it. But so there will be some different politics in the Senate, but we are really hoping in the statement that Chair Bozeman put out following the Farm Bill passage in the House, he hopes to get to consideration of the Farm Bill in that chamber, not within months, but as he likes to remind folks, within weeks. So we do expect the consideration to come over to the Senate side, and we'll continue to keep an eye on that as it moves forward. Again, first step in a long process. For thanks to all those folks that have been advocating for passage of the Farm Bill. We're right there with you, and hopefully we'll see some consideration in the Senate in the short-term horizon. But big week in Washington, not only for us within the farmer community, but just a big week in general before Congress is head out on this week's break. So, Megan, anything I miss or anything I should add?
No, I think you've hit it all. Certainly on the politics side, the other thing to think about, of course, in the Senate is just the different math that they have to get to.
Yep.
And we're no longer looking at a 50-50 vote. It needs to be 60 votes to passage. Farm bills historically have been very bipartisan. They have been able to achieve well above the 60 vote, but this is a different Congress, and we'll certainly be following this as it moves forward in the next couple of weeks, hopefully.
Yep. And again, happy to get it through the House, and we hope the Senate will start consideration sometime soon. And we're always in favor of bipartisanship here, so hopefully they'll be able to find a way. And again, we're happy that it was bipartisan coming out of the House as well.
So the one last thing that I think is important to understand, to use your phrase, Ben, in the sausage making, is why E-15 was cut out of that sausage making process. Can you just really briefly talk a bit about why that is not a part of the current version that went through the House?
Yep. We're going to get in the weeds here, folks, so pardon me. One of the things that was also considered by the Rules Committee was a standalone piece of legislation to allow for year-round E-15. This could not be included as part of the Farm Bill process because the House Ag Committee actually does not have jurisdiction over E-15. That would be another committee in charge of energy policy where E-15 would squarely lie. So that was hopefully going to be added on the other side of the Farm Bill being passed on the House floor. We do, as part of the deal that was struck, that was not voted on last week. However, there will be a standalone vote on E-15. As of now, this is subject to change as always.
Everything's subject to change, right?
Oh, 100%, especially in Washington. With narrow majorities, every vote matters, and timing sometimes falls out the window. But we do expect some sort of vote or some sort of further motion on E-15 the week of May 13th, which would be next week. So once Congress gets back, that is up for another consideration and something also we'll be watching in the House as well. For the Senate, again, falls into another committee's jurisdiction. The rules in the Senate are a little bit different than they are in the House, but we would expect that the bill would move. As of now, again, subject to change, we would expect the Farm Bill to move along some sort of E-15 proposal in the Senate. Whether E-15 becomes before the Farm Bill, after the Farm Bill consideration, we shall see. But again, there is a little bit more, let's just say, flexibility for consideration in the Senate. So we'll see what the House does, and we'll see what the Senate decides to do once the House gets done with its homework as well. So E-15 is a big issue for us out here in corn country. So hopefully we'll be able to get that across the finish line. And again, one of the big benefits to us in business is certainty. And that is one thing that the E-15 year-round does provide for a lot of those corn growers out there, is a great amount of certainty of how much corn this country will plan on using for produce biofuels. So every little bit helps.
Thanks for explaining that. I know we've chatted about that on this podcast before, but I mean, there were times last week where I really thought it was going to be repackaged back together. That was certainly something that evolved over the course of the week. It was in, it was out, and ultimately it just didn't make it through. We'll have to see if it happens next week or not. More to come.
Yep, we'll have something to talk about with you guys next time we hop on the horn here. So, Megan, speaking of all things in Washington, D.C., the Federal Reserve met last week. Can you give the folks a little bit of a summary of what went on and what their decision was?
Yeah, so the Fed met for their Federal Open Market Committee meeting, happens once every 6 weeks. We talk about it a lot on this podcast. There was a lot that happened at that meeting, and then also not really anything at all. Let's talk about the not anything at all part of it. No monetary policy changes, meaning the Fed held its target range steady, as was widely expected, at 3.5 to 3.75. They had no major updates on any of their policy decisions. And that was, in some regards, by plan. That was Chair Powell's last meeting as the FOMC chair. As far as we know, things could also change on that, but we do have a pretty good indication that that was his final meeting. He had mentioned that he would stay on as a pro temp chair or a temporary chair if the confirmation of Kevin Warsh was not possible in the Senate. It does look like that is progressing. So we also had that news coming out around the same time that they were meeting, that he is advanced out of the Senate Banking Committee and could proceed then to a full nomination vote. But there were some interesting things. We had some dissents from some of the Open Market Committee members, and that was regarding language on whether or not there would be further cuts to the Fed funds rate in the future, or whether there would be hikes. There was some argument that the press release that is very closely dissected, literally, I put the press release on one side of my computer screen from the prior meeting and the press release from the current one on the other side of my computer screen. And then I have it compare if there is any word that has changed. That's how closely folks look at this. And there was just a little bit of a phrasing in there that indicated that there would be future rate adjustments in the future, and that would be in a lower Fed funds target as compared to holding steady or a hike. And there were 3 dissents on that. So nothing happened. And then again, a lot happened. There was also a lot of focus on just the overall press conference and what the sentiment was regarding things like inflation, which leads me maybe to my next point, unless you have more questions.
Oh, one quick thing out there for the folks. Mr. Powell made a little bit of history out there as well. Do you want to dive into that for the folks on what he decided to do with his future?
Take it away, Ben.
Well, one of the things that normally happens is when you are chair of the Federal Reserve, you do not usually stay on the Open Market Committee after you've been chair. However, Mr. Powell decided that he would break with that tradition, given some of the politics around the Fed currently, and he would stay on. But he made it very clear he would not be a shadow chair, and he would allow Mr. Warsh to continue on as his role of chair. And then just a little bit of a reminder, folks out there, and Mr. Powell was quite clear on this, it is a committee decision. It's not the decision of the chair. So we will continue to watch that. Mr. Powell did say that he would be on for the foreseeable future. Whether I believe he will stay on until his term as a governor runs out in 2028, we shall see. But a little bit of history was made there yesterday with him deciding to stick around. So we'll see how the dynamics on all things Fed go, and it'll be interesting for us economic nerds out there in 3 years' time to read the minutes from the meetings going forward. So we'll see in the future what was discussed.
Yeah, he was definitely, I wouldn't say cagey, but it was very vague on what that end date would be. And that is just even that vagueness of saying I'm going to stick around is a move in a different direction. But this is a committee decision. Whenever there is a Fed Open Market Committee meeting, it takes the majority of the 12 voting members to make a decision. However, we hear about it from a chair at a press conference, and that really does get to be what we hear from the committee really comes out of those press conferences. There's also times where all of the Fed presidents and the governors go out and we can get some idea of where they're headed. But when it comes to these open market committee meetings, it really does tee into and focus on what the chair is saying. So we'll have to see what happens in June. Theoretically, we should have Chair Warsh for the June meeting. Theoretically.
There we go. And I cut you off, Megan. What else would you like to talk about next?
Well, at the press conference, there was quite a bit of focus on oil and inflation and what might be coming next from both market interest rates, but then from the Fed. And it does tie back to some major geopolitical events that we have talked about on this podcast before. Certainly, there is challenge getting oil and fertilizer and any number of goods through the Strait of Hormuz right now. And we have our first major inflation reports for the month of March. There's always a data lag. We know that the March personal consumption expenditures index came in at 3.5%, and it was driven by a number of different factors, but it would be hard to overlook the 20.9% price increase in energy goods during that month. So working through this current input price spike is going to be something that for us in agriculture we have to work through, but the greater economy is moving through it right now as well, and it is affecting things like rates. So that's really what I want to talk about from a macroeconomic perspective. I think we should get out of Washington, though, and we should talk about what's going on in the fields.
Yep, spring is on its way. We do have, well, kind of Washington because we have to talk about USDA a little bit here, but there are some numbers that we're looking forward to. Do you want to give folks a glimmer into what's coming on next week?
We've got the May World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimate Report. That is going to be the first WASDE that has May-related prices for 2026-2027 growing season. That's the first time it hits the WASDE. We have had numbers already this year, though. It comes out of the February outlook. I don't know at this point exactly what they're going to be. We've been talking this whole time that it's really hard to predict exactly where numbers are going to end up, or in the case of Ben, where legislation is going to end up. For this WASDE, it is likely that you'll see some themes that have already been happening throughout this spring season. We're seeing a little bit of an increase on some of our grain and oilseed prices. We're seeing a bit of that pullback on corn acres. Certainly that is likely to be exacerbated by the energy and fertilizer price increases, although a lot of 2026 decisions were already made prior to anything that happened in March and April. But I know that I will be looking to that report to give a bit more insight on where our overall corn and soybean economic situation is as we move further into spring. The other thing that I'm looking at on a weekly basis, and I know, Ben, you and I were chatting about this, was the crop progress and just where things are in terms of planting. What are some of the things you're hearing right now?
Well, for us here in southern Minnesota, where my family farms, progress is well underway. Some parts of Compeer's territory got a little bit more rain than we did here in southern Minnesota. I know our dear colleagues in Illinois got a little bit heavier dose than we did up here. However, all conditions seem fairly good. And given the pace of the year and some of the other delays we had seen, especially over the last 5-year trajectory, we're still on pretty good mark to finish putting this crop in the ground within, let's just call it the historical time frame out there for folks as well. So for all you tired folks listening to us in a tractor right now, stay safe out there. We hope you finish up sometime soon and can switch over to the next stage, spraying and all things we have to do after we get the crop in the ground. So one last thing here, kind of not moving back to DC, but another capital out there. We do have an upcoming trade summit here. Megan, do you want to give folks a little bit of a highlight of what's coming next on the trade front?
Yeah, when it comes to soybeans, things like the crop progress report matter, things like WASDE matters. Don't want to undersell the importance of either of those things. But when it comes to maybe the hottest topic for soybean pricing right now, you could make an argument. I'm not saying it's the only argument, but you could possibly make an argument that the market is really curious to see what happens with the upcoming China trade summit. There's not a ton of information out. There is, at this point, a wait and see, but there will be a Trump-Z summit in May, and it is going to be important in terms of whether there is perhaps a more clear commitment on ag purchases, particularly on the soybean side, especially because we have the 2025 October-November deal where we're maybe not seeing all of that come to fruition. We really need to have more information to see what happens next.
Yeah. And just a reminder, folks, that this summit has been in the works for quite some time now. So was not an ad hoc thing that just popped up. It's something that this administration has been working towards for quite a bit of time. So we'll see how things develop, given that there were some additional topics probably added to that agenda, given some of the news over the last couple of weeks.
So many more additional topics. And we thought this was going to happen earlier in this year. It has been rescheduled to May. So I might be talking about a meeting that does or does not happen. I hope it does, because there are a lot of dynamics that go far beyond just soybeans. But for soybeans, this is a very important trade discussion. The other thing that I think is maybe DC related, USDA related, I was messaged literally as we're recording here. We do have additional announcements that are coming out of USDA on some previous ad hoc. You mentioned the word ad hoc, and then I got thinking about ad hoc payments. So just a really brief plug about the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program. If you happen to be in an area that qualifies for that, there has been an announcement for additional payments on that. Many of us have already been in areas, well, Ben and I farm very close to one another. So we're in an area that has already qualified for SDRP 1 and 2. But there are other places in Compeer that maybe have not previously been able to maximize payments on that. So that has increased in terms of a payment factor. And I am going to do a very clumsy transition talking about Compeer's larger territory. Ben and I are in a very intense, small one-county area of the Compeer territory. When you bring it out to the overall 144 counties, that crop progress has been a little bit varied.
Yep.
But I want to even clumsierly make a transition out to the whole U.S. and end on just that we in our area are not seeing much continuation of drought. There are exceptions. We do have some pockets that are experiencing drought still, but just wanted to maybe bring it out even further to the Plains area and the southeast of the U.S. They are in some very, very extreme drought. And so when we're thinking about weather pricing, you do have to think beyond your local area and even the local Compeer 3-state area. We have some really, really significant drought, and that is affecting the beef side. It's also affecting wheat. And we don't talk about wheat much, but I do think that the wheat conditions, very poor conditions for winter wheat in particular, has been driving some of our pricing on commodities over the last couple of weeks. And so that's another thing that I'm keeping an eye on as we move into the next week with the WASDE, with some of these other reports, just where things fall, because it's not just one factor that's driving any of this. If I were to summarize this whole episode, there are a lot of different factors at play, and we'll see little bits of all of those factors affect pricing as we move into the end of May and into June. Ben, what are your thoughts to to finish us out here?
Well, folks, I think we're going to leave you on a tradition at this point, which every time me and Megan sit down, which is there's much more to come.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens over the next coming weeks, and we'll continue to keep you up to speed as best we can on the events of the day. But once again, a lot of things out there in the works for folks to be considering, especially as we move deeper into this crop year as well.
Maybe by June, we'll be talking about a Senate version of the Farm Bill. Do we think we're going to have text?
I hope so.
We got to have text.
Yeah,
Yeah?
I hope so. I hope that the Senate will keep on moving at an expedient rate again. One of the dynamics that'll be a little bit different as the Farm Bill heads over the Senate is some issues around SNAP. As a reminder to the folks that some of the cost share differences between the state and the federal government were adjusted as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill. Given that the dynamics around all things SNAP are a little bit different in the Senate than they are in the House, that is something that Amy Klobuchar, the ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee, definitely has on the top of her mind as the Farm Bill heads over there as well. So SNAP will be one of the factors out there that will be under discussion in the Senate side. Not that it wasn't under discussion in the House side, but again, those politics are a little bit different there as well.
And when you're talking SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and that is a very key and important topic for both the House and the Senate.
Yep, and that's where a lot of the dollars are for the Farm Bill. Again, a lot of that was already handled or adjusted as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill. But given that there was that change to the calculation about how much the states would pay versus how much the federal government would pay, subject to error rates and what have you, don't need to get into the actual math of that. But that will definitely be one of the things that will come up and be talked about as the bill moves through the Senate. And just a reminder, folks, that even after the Senate passes their piece of legislation, because the Senate and the House are different legislative bodies, they like to come up with different text, and that'll be have to conferenced at some point and then voted on again on both floors of both chambers. So we are 1 out of 4 votes done. So we'll see how the rest of them play out before, hopefully, this piece of legislation ends up on the president's desk before the end of the year.
So more sausage making to come, more planting to come. We'll have lots of things to discuss in June. Stay safe out there. Best of luck. Thank you for listening to Compeer's Ag Edge. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. For more agricultural finance insights and resources, visit Compeer.com. That's COMPEER.com. Until next time.